also saying no and standing against what you actually believe in. Okay. So I'm going to talk about 6 things I discovered about boundaries, right? Especially being single, like just as a single woman as well. I'm sure it relates to people who are married, but we're going to talk about it. Just 6 things I discovered about boundaries, especially being single, really navigating that and just really owning it. Okay. And I'm going to be telling this story to you because it really showed how much I grew. It really showed how far I came, right? Because boundaries are one of those things. When I say boundaries, it was very hard for me to say no. And I used to agree to things that was against, contrary to what I wanted to do. I didn't necessarily want to do it, but I would do things and agree to it, even though it would make me feel upset. It made me feel mad about it. And then I would think back and say, like, man, why didn't I just say no? But instead, I was trying to please the other person. So the other day, I thought this was interesting. So this happened online, and it just made me realize how far I came. So what had happened is I connected with someone. This was on the Reddit forum, and right away we were just giving advice, helping people grow, all that stuff. And then immediately, this guy he DMs me, and he was like, "Oh, like, what's your YouTube channel?" And I was like, at first, my first intuition was like, I don't think I should give it. But I was like, you know what? I have nothing to lose. Let me just give it. And immediately he was like, hey, can I give you feedback? And I remember I had to stop and think. And I said to him, I was like, hey, no. I'm like, I don't need feedback. My channel's growing. I'm good where I am. And it was in that moment where I remember there was a part of me that was like, should I have said no? Like, and I started second guessing myself until as I thought about it and I started being really logical, I was like, you know what? I made the right decision because I stuck to my beliefs. I stuck to what I'm based on what I'm seeing. I stuck to the evidence that I saw. And I said, no, I don't need your feedback. And you know what? The biggest thing I learned from that moment was it's okay to say no and you don't have to feel bad about it. And I know this is something that, especially with women, it's very hard to say no. Very hard. And so I personally I felt like I needed to celebrate that moment because I was like, I actually said no and stuck with it. And I believed in myself so much more that I was able to say no and just walk away from it and not even have that FOMO feeling, right? And so that's the biggest thing too is that it's like you require belief. You need to have belief in yourself. If you don't have belief, it's very hard. It's very hard if it's very hard to stick to your boundary. It's very hard to stick to what you know, right? And so I remember there was another instance where I had a woman where we connected in a networking group, and I'm in Toronto. So we connected in a networking group, and I remember there was this woman where I guess what she did is she liked basically exchanging, like her network with your services, and that's fine, whatever. And I remember it got to the point where she was starting to ask, like, okay, can we like, barter for her services and my services because I did lead generation, so I was helping people get clients. And I remember it so vividly because I remember the feeling as well because at first I agreed to it and I was like, yeah, that could be a deal, da da da. But at the time I was charging monthly and there was a lot of work that went into it, like setting up automation and all that stuff. And I remember getting off the call with her because it was a very good call. And I was like, but do really want that? Like, do I actually want to barter? And I remember I had a hard time with it. So I went to a mentor and immediately, I like how men think. Like, men are just like straight to the point. He was just like, no, just tell her you're not looking for any paid clients. And I was like, huh, why did I think of just saying that? Like, it sounds so simple. So I went back to her, and what I ended up doing is I tried to like, offer something else that wasn't as intensive compared to people that were paying monthly. And obviously she didn't like it because the call got very awkward, and she was like, no, I don't want to do the other things you recommended. But let me tell you, when I got off that call after telling that, I felt so liberated. I think it was that moment where it was the first time I ever said no, and I was like, man, I need to say no more often and stick up to myself. Right? I need to say no more often because it makes me feel good, especially if it's not aligned. If it's not aligned, you need to say no. If someone's offering to give you advice about something and you didn't ask for it, you need to say no. The one thing I really appreciated with that person that was going to give me unsolicited advice is that he asked me first, and I had the opportunity to be like, no, no, no. Because you know what sometimes happens is that when you take advice from people, especially if you didn't ask for it and you didn't need it and you weren't looking for it and you weren't ready, because when you're taking advice from someone, you better be ready. What I noticed is it can really slow you down when someone gives you advice, and it can slow down your progress. At the time, like, this channel is growing. It's growing. Like, I'm connecting with women, I'm connecting my ideal audience. So there was no reason, absolutely no reason, for me to take any advice at this point. And I want to be clear, is like, this was someone that I did not know. So like, even more so, like, someone where it's random, you're not gonna be taking advice from some like random Joe. The other thing is, you're not obligated to always get feedback on things that you're working on. It's so important that you learn to trust yourself and when you're doing something. You don't always need feedback by someone. I know, like, in especially in, in every industry, like, that you do, people always say, oh, get feedback to get better. But sometimes you don't need to get feedback. Sometimes you just need to trust yourself and continue doing what you're doing. And you'll know in due time when you need feedback. But you don't always need to get feedback because that's what you're supposed to do. You're not obligated to it. And this is coming from someone who always has been a people pleaser and always wanted validation. Do you know that the one time, not one time, but the one instance that I asked someone for their feedback in something that I was doing was the time that ended up getting me discouraged and giving up. Because you see, sometimes you have to learn to just create. You just have to create whatever that is, like whatever you're doing. Sometimes you just have to create. You don't always need feedback, right? Sometimes you just need to continue doing it and trust the process and keep on doing it and keep on doing it until you see some type of change, or you reach some certain like milestone. But you don't always need feedback just because you start doing something. You don't, no matter how much experience they have, because that one feedback can be the one thing that slows you down and maybe causes you to give up, and then you have to start years later, especially if you are not ready. Especially if you're not ready, especially if you're not ready to hear feedback. Sometimes you're not ready to hear feedback, and it's important that you embrace that. I'm not saying that you never ever take any type of like feedback from people, but it's like this is a part of creating boundaries for yourself and learning to trust yourself, learning to respect yourself and where you are, and giving yourself grace and compassion. A lot of people don't do that. Or it's just very hard to, because we live in a world where it tells you get feedback, get feedback. Like, no, you don't. You don't need to be validated. Like, you don't need the constant validation on what you're doing, especially if you're single. Like, the whole benefit of that is that you don't have to discuss it with anyone else. You can literally work in silence. Like, especially if you're working in silence, and if someone asks you like, hey, what are you doing? You don't need to tell them. You just say, oh, you keep it general. Oh, I'm working on so and so, and that's it. And you end it there. You end the conversation right then and there. Like, you are not obligated, especially as a single person, to be telling people your business just because someone asks. Like, you don't have to let someone in to your life and your personal space regarding what you're working on in silence. You don't have to. You can keep it completely secret. And if someone asks you, just say, everything is good. You keep it real general. Like, yeah, that's so and so's good, or you don't even mention it at all. You don't have to mention things that you are working on. Next one is recognize and appreciate where you are. So imagine, based on that story, so imagine if I didn't know and understand what I was doing, understand what my mission was. Imagine if I didn't understand it or if I didn't believe in it, right? And imagine if I just said, "Oh, let me get feedback from a random person." Don't do it. Right? You don't know what, like, where it could take you. You don't know what they could say that can discourage you, and then you have to work again to get yourself back up. No, like, it's just not worth it, especially if you don't know the person, they're not trusted. Like, my biggest rule is that if I'm gonna get advice from someone, they either have to have the life that I want, or like they either have to have the life that I want, um or it's someone that, like, is highly trusted, like highly respected. Like, I've spoken to them a few times. Some of you guys will take advice from anyone, like letting people, like, go over your boundaries just like that. No, no, don't do it. Don't do it. No matter how much you want to grow, it's never worth, like, allowing someone to cross what you're doing, cross what you're believing in. um and this is why I always talk about how important it is to have besticles for yourself. And I actually speak about this in a private podcast. And in this, it's a podcast I've been launching, and I actually go through, like, how to create your own besticles and how to have, like, respect for yourself, like how to create, like, rules around your current life, so that way you're living the life you want, and so that way you're ready. And I believe that I was ready to deflect that question when they ask, "Oh, do you want feedback?" Because that's like my sore spot. That's like my sweet spot right there, right? And I believe I was able to deflect it and finally say no, because I've worked on myself. I worked on creating rules around myself where I said, if I'm working on something, like, I don't want anyone's feedback unless I ask for it. Like, that was my biggest, like, hump that I had to get over, right? And so I'm actually launching a private podcast where it's gonna be like private membership only, like, where only the only people who are getting access to it is if they're paying for it, and then basically it'd be like a very interactive type podcast where people be able to submit their questions, and we'll be having real conversations, and it's a little bit more deeper than the videos that I currently do, because I'm getting even more private. The goal is to build that relationship, right? Bestie to bestie. So we go all in that private podcast. Okay. So you need to understand your mission. So if you don't understand what you're doing, it's going to be very hard to repel people. It's going to be very hard to say no, especially if it goes against what you believe in and what standards you have set for yourself. If you don't understand, like, what your mission is, it's the same as, like, if you don't understand your worth, right? You're going to be dating any joker that comes out and says they're interested. If you don't understand your worth, you don't understand who you are, and you don't understand, like, what you truly deserve, anyone's able to come into your space and do anything, and do, like, cartwheels and backflips, to be able to do anything they want, because you don't understand who you are. But once you understand what your mission is, once you understand who you are and your worth and your values, then it makes it easier to be recognized when that person should not be in your life, where you're like, right? This goes for friendships, platonics, like anything. So I believe that was the first, like, that's like the first, like, point of that part that I mentioned, understanding your mission. And I believe also it's having more patience. I find people tend to get impatient with their process and the progress, because they deep down they don't truly believe that they're going to grow. They don't truly believe that whatever they're doing is going to work. So they get impatient, and then that's where the desperate part comes in. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, like, am I doing fine? Is this working? Like, should I be doing this?" They start asking those questions. And whenever you start asking those questions, again, because you're questioning yourself, that's when you need to take a step back and be like, hold on here. Like, I need to give myself time. I need to give myself patience. And I believe that was one of the reasons that caused me to actually stick to my boundaries and say, hey, no, like, I don't need what you're offering, because I am at a point where I've done this so many times that I've come to a point where I'm like, I understand where I am. I understand that I need to have patience. I understand that I need to have grace. And I understand that you need to have more compassion. So, like, you need to give yourself time to grow. You need to give yourself time to work on yourself, right? There's no rush to do anything. People who rush, I find, are the first ones to give up because they're in a rush to get a certain result. So when they don't get that certain result in the time frame that they're looking for, then they end up just quitting, right? Because it didn't come as fast as they wanted it to. Um, when I And I have to admit that in the past, when I would start something, I wouldn't have a patience to start it. I wouldn't have the patience to basically get through it. And I'm completely guilty of that. And so, what usually happened is that I wouldn't give myself time to grow. And then I would just give up on it because I didn't have patience for it. And I didn't truly have patience for it. I didn't truly believe in myself. And so I had no sense of creating boundary when it came in that area, right? It's hard to create boundaries when you're in a desperate state. It's very hard to create boundaries. I believe it's very hard to create boundaries if um, you're not understanding what the process should look like. No, I'm not saying like you will understand the process. You'll know every step of the process, but like if you don't have a very realistic picture of like, okay, this is gonna be take me so and so time, then it's hard to create that boundary for yourself and stick to what you said that you're going to do, right? In terms of like bestie codes. Um, you need to be protective of what you believe in or whatever you're doing, right? It goes for everything. Like, um, you, if you're creating boundaries for yourself, for example, like if someone asks you to do something, you're like, I'm gonna say no to this because I cannot do it anymore. It's a sign that you're respecting yourself. Like when you decide to say no, you're being protective of yourself. If you decide, like for example, when I decided that I said, I'm not gonna take the feedback from you, I was being protective of my purpose. I was being protective of my current space because I did not know them. So it's really coming in with that mindset that when you create boundaries and in order to follow them, you need to be protective of something, whether that's you, whether it's your purpose, whether that's your values. You need to be protective of it because you know that if you get out of that, if you get out of being protective, of that very thing that keeps you like at peace, keeps you, keeps you in flow. Like like what's that word? Like it just keeps you at a nice steady line, right? You need to be protective. You need to be protective of that because I found that when I cross my boundaries and I don't stick to it, that's when I get that feeling of, oh man, like I start beating myself up, right? And then you're like, oh, why did I do this? And then you have this like heaviness in your heart because you're like, man, I shouldn't have done this. And that's exactly what that's like. Is your rule is that you stay in your boundaries because you know it keeps you here and it doesn't have you going like this and getting to a low point because you agreed to something or there's something that was against what you believe in. And that's very key. Very key. So what I was gonna say here is I don't care like how much you feel like getting validated is important because it's not. Like you should be able to validate yourself. If you had a child and then someone randomly just comes up to you and wants to give you advice on how to discipline your child, you would be offended. You know why? Because you're protective of your child. You're protective of the words that people are imparting on them. So you wouldn't just let some random Joe Blow would come and give you advice about your child and tell you how your child should act. You'd be like deeply offended. Someone did that. And so I would say those are one of the key things is just being protective. Um, People can only give you advice based on how much they know you. So I recently, I know someone that's in a space that I'm wanting to grow in. And hey, London. And I know someone that they're in a space they want to grow in. And so when I did reach out to them to get advice on, like on a different topic, I thought it was interesting because they didn't take the time to get to know what I was doing with notes from your bestie. So when they gave advice, the advice was good, but it wasn't as tailored because they didn't know me. So like that's the reason is like people can only give you as much as what they want to give you as much as they know you. Like they that's why validation is so because you have to have it yourself because people are only going to give you advice on like based on their experience unless they're very good at navigating that unless there's someone that they're able to take what they experience and then apply it to your life. But like most people are not able to do that. That's why it's like so important to have boundaries. And so I want to say this is that I'm doing a workshop on purpose. And what this workshop really is that even if you know your purpose, the whole goal is to give you like exact steps of what you need to do in that so the goal is when you come in you're getting like 3 steps. You're gonna know exactly what you need to do next in terms of what your purpose is. I did this because I wish I had something like that when I was growing. I wish I had something where someone was just telling me like, okay, you need to do this and this and this, and that's that, instead of like taking many years to find what my purpose is. But I basically in my like business, what I do is I basically help people start from scratch with their business. So I help them from scratch and I build all their messaging and everything else, like whatever they're dreaming about, whatever their purpose is, and I help them build it into a business. And so what this workshop really is focused on is us getting in the hot seat, and then we're gonna actually be talking about your purpose. We're going in there, we're getting in there. And we're gonna talk it out and see like, okay, what is it what you want to do? What were you stuck on? Um, what were you stuck on, what crushes you have, where do you feel like you need help with. And that's really the goal of that workshop, is that you come out that purpose driven workshop so with full clarity you'll know exactly what you need to do next. And so if you're interested in it, it's in July 13th, I believe. And it's a notes from your bestie.com/purpose driven. It's slash purpose driven. And if you go to that website, you can see in the description, you'll be able to sign up. And I think you guys are going to like it because it's so high touch. It's not just a workshop. It's so high touch. I'm going to be able to speak to everyone and give them the necessary steps that they need. We're going to create real affirmations. So that way you're getting the success that you're meant for, right? You're getting to your mission that you're meant for. I'm really believing in that. So yeah, if you just arrived, rewatch the replay. It's gonna be here. Drop in the comments if you watch a replay. Tell me what you think about boundaries, and have a good day, guys.